A pleasure to meet all at last, and today, with more HJN comes a number of opportunities down the line. But for today's special, what we're going to do is bring up a few more franchises, one of which in particular that we're going to be talking about is known as A Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, so this is the highly acclaimed horror series that was one of the first to be known in the so-called slasher genre. This, of course, was at around the same time that other franchises such as Friday the 13th, Halloween, and a few others were all put into place. By the 1980s, it truly began a global phenomenon that was unlike most other horror films at this time. There were plenty of other horror-related films, sometimes ones that are being a one-off, as in no sequels to follow, one of which was known as My Bloody Valentine. But Nightmare on Elm Street did things a bit differently. It took the phenomenon of nightmares and amplified them to the point in which that a well-known serial killer would unfortunately become the killer in people's dreams. There, of course, is that famous tagline, "When you die in your dreams, you die for real." And of course proved to be true in 6 movies that came around throughout the 1980s. Nightmare on Elm Street's parts 1 through 6 were especially subjective to the likes of the Nightmare adaptation being put through in a unique fictionalized setting. Elm Street, of course, is one of the main settings in which that these films take place in. And the whole point of them as well, while there are a few recurring characters in there, including one known by the name of Nancy, there of course are the many others that will pop up here and there, some of which are just meant specifically to add bodies to the kill counts. And if you've seen all the kill count videos, then congratulations. You marathon through basically an impressive feat of modern engineering. Well, in any case though, the first film centers us off with a local named Tina, her boyfriend Rod. They're both basically in their house, in which that she ends up dreaming a man is standing there with large finger blades, a glove in which that becomes an iconic piece of props. And apart from the unique outfit that Freddy Krueger is seen wearing, whom is revealed to be the killer of Elm Street. He of course was the Nightmare on Elm Street, the original. He had recently died, was cast off to the underworld. In an effort to avenge his own death, he would actually kill a number of people in their dreams. By doing this, with his first major kill of course being an impressive feat of acting done by the one and only character known as Tina, there of course would be eventual accusations about Rod supposedly committing the bloody murder against her, even though he of course had bared witness to the whole thing and that it wasn't really him who did it. But little evidence was there to prove this. He was locked up in a jail cell and was eventually strangled to death via, what do you know, Freddy Krueger coming back for more. Throughout the rest of the whole film though, there of course were other people that end up getting killed. One guy played by Johnny Depp. Yeah, a while before he of course was famous for many other things. There of course were other people involved as well, and even Nancy herself ended up becoming the target of Freddy Krueger. Eventually, after a number of things occurred, including some objects being brought back from the dream world, including Freddy's own hat, Nancy goes as far to believe that after some time has passed, when enough acknowledgement is given to Freddy, the only course of action that she could possibly think of is to ignore him. Apparently, it works in her favor though, because Freddy just somehow vanishes into nowhere. Yeah, kind of crazy when you think about it. But still, I will say that that film was a good way to start things off. And the success that it brought on for Wes Craven as well as for many others, even Robert Englund himself, the man behind the role of Freddy Krueger, he would go on to play Freddy throughout the rest of the times. Well, except for a 2010 remake. Anyways though, with the other 5 films, he would of course come along and take down a coach for the most part, and would eventually pop out at a pool party a lot of people would be killed from there. And eventually it turns out that Freddy would turn to ash upon lips interlocking with each other, which alone is a bit strange, but an effective way to kill him nonetheless. The next few films, of course, continue to follow the likes of Nancy, but of which she herself ends up dead. And a few witnesses to her, some friends, were able to take down Freddy, and in addition to this, her parents would end up burying the remains of Freddy Krueger himself. Being laid to rest is apparently a double down way to defeat him for good. But unfortunately, they had to continue on with the other 3 films. Dog urine apparently had the power to bring him back at one point, which is kind of strange when you think about it. And the whole film itself mainly centers on Freddy taking revenge against all the guys that took him down. I mean, you had people in there like Will and Roland and many others out there. The neighborhood kids apparently took him down, so the only course of action for him is to come on back and bring on some more terror. And from then on out, there aren't that many other characters to cheer for, a lot of which are newcomers and don't quite realize about the extent of what the dream world is like, and moreover, what Freddy's like. So with 5 and 6, you have various other people whom unfortunately end up becoming their own victims for Freddy to murder and mutilate with, including one known by the name of Greta, whom has eating issues. And there is also Sheila with basically a breathing problem that goes on mainly through asthma. And there is even a guy named John whom is taken high up into the sky and then falls on a bed of spikes. Probably a couple of the best, though, would have to be Spencer, for instance, in which that, despite it being the 6th film in the series, a stoner who likes to play video games ends up becoming a part of a video game, that of which actually encompasses the infamous Power Glove. No joke. Freddy's controller is yanked out of the TV as he's controlling Spencer and taking him to his death row sequence, but even though the kids are able to apprehend him and stop him from doing so, the Power Glove comes around. Yeah, as if his own bladed glove is not enough. Even more crazy is that one of the characters in Part 6 is actually a relative of his. But nonetheless, the two would end up basically settling their differences in the form of Freddy getting stabbed with his own glove and eventually getting blown up by explosives. So, while not exactly the best way they could have done him justice for the 6th and final film in the canon series, it wasn't exactly the best way they could have ended it overall, but nonetheless, they continued to go on even further. Wes Craven's New Nightmare in 1994 did give us a bit more than what we bargained for. Miko Hughes, whom was already famous in the 1989 film Pet Sematary, comes back for more after a few years, and honestly does well as a boy who freaks out over various people getting killed by Freddy, and eventually working up the courage to defeat Freddy himself. Eventually putting him inside an oven where he's cooked to death. Yeah, kind of a unique way to go compared to the last film, don't you think? And then of course Freddy would show up again, a cameo appearance at the end of Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, citing that a possible Freddy vs. Jason would come around. However, it would take until 2003 where they would finally have the ability to do so. Budgetary concerns, as well as ownership of the franchises, eventually working out the agreements on how to actually put together a good Freddy vs. Jason film. It all worked out in its own way, because a $25 million film was put together in 2003, and when it was released, it was big. Probably the biggest, not just by expense, but also by other things as well. So you could say, Freddy vs. Jason was the true redeemer for both franchises, where they tried and tried again, but failed to impress people over time, and eventually got so lackluster that they both had to drop off, otherwise they would have continued to really bomb the franchise. And I also will say that Freddy vs. Jason does an effective job at giving us the weaknesses for both characters. Freddy with fire, Jason with water, they both hate those elements. And so, you could say that both of these scenes do an impressive job at capturing the weaknesses for either character in such glorified detail. Freddy exposing Jason to the water truly releases his fear of it, because as a boy, we know that he drowned in the first Friday the 13th film and came back as the form of some sort of undead killer. Meanwhile, with Freddy, we know that he was basically subjected to burning in hell because of the serial killing as well as the pedophilia that he put together against the children. Whether this was true or not, though, is practically more for what the lore can offer, but nevertheless, though, there was even a 2010 remake that showed up. Not very much to say on that part, because what's really the point of it? It's a remake. It's something that's been done twice. So, I ultimately can't say all that much more about the franchise from here on out, considering the fact that there hasn't been very much of it, apart from maybe a few gags or jokes that were put along, including a Family Guy episode worth of it. But not much more to say otherwise. It's glad, and I'm certainly glad, that they are doing it right from here on out. Leaving the franchise alone is probably a better thing to do than to bring it back and possibly make it worse than it already is with the remake. Friday the 13th is much around the same sort of deal here because we haven't gotten much of that either, but maybe that's a subject for another day. So make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.